We will now begin with panel 4, which explores whether regional transmission facilities for reliability costs are adequately scrutinized. Specifically, this panel will discuss challenges associated with cost management during the transmission provider's evaluation of potential regional transmission facilities for reliability, the transmission provider's selection of the regional transmission facility for reliability for the purposes of cost allocation, and the development of the regional transmission facility for reliability. Additionally, this panel will explore whether there are any best practices in regional transmission facilities for reliability cost management. Finally, this panel will also discuss the roles the Commission could play in ensuring appropriate cost management practices are in place. Like in earlier panels, please refrain from reading your summary statements. Remember to turn your mics on and please kind of lean in. I'm on a chat with IT and they're bothering me politely. So without further ado, we have Sean Shukar of Ameren, Michael Hogg of Ohio Consumers Council, Paul Susky, SPP, Bob Weishar, Industrial Customers, Gina Furnish of MISO, Carolyn Barbash of NV Energy, Larry Gastiger of Wires, and Ron Jerwatowski of the Rhode Island Commission. Without any further ado, Commissioner Phillips, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, John. I'm get to go first, so I can ask anything I want, so buckle in, y'all. On all seriousness, we're going to focus on cost management, as he described from the top. I'm going to start with Mr. Shukar. You mentioned in your statement about the benefits of MISO's variance analysis. Particularly, I'm interested in, like, if a project cost goes up, what you do with that. Can you please expand a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so in the MISO, they look at the costs that we submit to them each 6 months. We update that information. And then when it goes beyond a certain point, then they do a variance analysis, and then they will look at it to say, should that project move forward or should it not move forward? And so at the end of the day, it provides an opportunity to respond to the project and to ensure that when we have projects that have been approved, that we step back and reevaluate to make sure they're still valuable to our customers, valuable to what we were trying to accomplish.
Ms. Furnish, you must imagine I was setting you up to just spike this one. So go right
Appreciate
ahead.
that. So for our variance analysis, we have 4 different types of triggers. One is cost, and if there's a 25% cost increase, then that will trigger our variance analysis process. There's also schedule overruns that we consider with that. Essentially, after we look at the variance, we then decide what should we do. Do we accept the variance? Was there good reasons, such as a routing condition that hadn't been planned in the planning, swamplands or something like that? Or do we need a mitigation plan? And sometimes in one instance, when we went through a variance analysis, part of the mitigation plan was that if costs increased 10%, we would look at it. We wouldn't wait for that 25% threshold to be met again. And then we could also reassign the project or not move forward with the projects if the benefits were eroded.
So just taking a step back for everyone on the panel, thinking about this, if you're not aware of it, this variance analysis tool, is this something that you all think could be used or applied in other regions beyond MISO, or even if you would like to opine on whether or not you think this is a best practice?
I actually think that this is a very good practice, except for those regional reliability projects that we've already had quite a bit of stakeholder discussion on to understand what happens after the project actually starts its construction and starts moving through some of those later phases. So I do think there's value. We've gone through 3 different variance analysis with 3 different outcomes. So I think that's one thing to think about is what are those items to be aware of and where could that specificity fit within the different regions or organizations that could apply it.
Seeing no takers, I will come to you, Mr. Weishar. Am I saying it right? Weishar. Thank you. My apologies. So, could you talk a little bit about your proposal for the Commission to establish an independent transmission planner in non-RTO regions?
And that question's directed to me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Commission, for scheduling this technical conference. As we have had discussions over the past several years, transmission costs are an increasing and critical element of our group members' bills, and our group members are manufacturers across the country. A lot of them are concentrated in the PJM and MISO region, where we've seen pretty significant cost increases. On the issue of independent transmission planners and independent transmission monitors, we think those go hand in hand. Where we have existing ISOs and RTOs, I think those entities could and should function as the independent transmission planners. Our view is that all transmission facilities over which the commission has jurisdiction should be planned by an independent transmission planner. We have had for years a somewhat artificial regulatory distinction between local projects on one hand and regional projects on the other. Sat here and listened to Mr. Seiler's comments about how PJM says they take a holistic look at all facilities, sub-transmission and regional transmission. Well, if that's the case, then why is there a distinction in the regulatory oversight, the cost recovery, eligibility for competition between local projects or supplemental projects, as they're referred to in PJM and regional? So putting all of that under an independent transmission planner, in our view, makes good sense. They can look at all these different factors like MISO and SPP and PJM and others are doing. But that should go down to 100 kV level. And as we've made painfully clear in all of our comments in the NOPR and ANOPR proceedings, our view is that all those projects, 100 kV and above, should be open to competition.
Thanks, sir. Carol?
Regarding the need to have an independent transmission planner, I would say it's not necessary, at least in where the part of the region where I'm from, and on the west. Our regions are very large, our states are very large, and we're mostly serve bundled retail customers in the Western Interconnection. Our state commissions approve anywhere probably from 70 to 90% of the revenue requirement, and they're very involved in the planning process. So we all have an obligation to serve our loads in order to keep our right to do that. And our commission has open processes. There's nothing secret about the transmission planning process. In our company, we do a biennial 10-year plan. We involve all our stakeholders, all our customers taking service under the OAT, all our large customers. We take their input, we set our goals, we set our cadence for the meetings, and the procedure is very well laid out on how the planning goes. We get their load forecasts, we develop our own for our bundled retail customers, and we plan for our wholesale customers and our retail customers. We take that to the commission, who has every right to approve the prudency, the costs, the benefits before allowing us to move forward. And our integrated resource planning is a 20-year planning horizon with a 3-year action plan budget. And again, they're looking, they have jurisdiction over 80% of the transmission costs. And so they have every motive to make sure that those are prudent. And then we go back again to FERC and to our commission to get those costs approved in rates so that the project is ensured to be managed correctly from a project management standpoint, from a cost control standpoint. And both processes are very transparent and open. So I would say no need.
No
Thank
need.
you.
Ms. Furnish, quick response?
Sure. I think there's been a lot of conversation around this today, and when we facilitate a transparent process, I hear some of the challenges is really how to consume the information. And just as I've kind of listened to the conversation, I think it's important to consider what is the role of the independent transmission, what could that be, and how is that actually meeting everyone's needs? So I think about, is it actually appropriate to put all the eggs in one basket? Are we going to be able to meet the needs of what I hear from state regulators, consumer advocates, all with one solution, or are there other opportunities to do that? When we went through our long-range transmission planning effort, we really spent a lot of time with our organization of MISO states, some consultants that they hired to make sure they understand that Then I think about that from a local reliability component, 350 projects. And what I'm trying to figure out, are we talking about 350 projects and there's capacity for this independent transmission monitor to think about alternatives for every single project? I mean, that's a huge work effort. I think about the work effort we are just trying to do with transparency for all those projects and to facilitate some of those stakeholder conversations, which are beyond 55 stakeholder meetings where we have over 100 participants, where we are happy to partner with people to continue to understand how to consume the information. But there's a lot of questions on how does that actually become something that's viable.
And I think there's another question about how much would all of that cost, right? So going back to, and this is a question for everybody on the panel. At the top, I talked about the top of the day. I talked about our formula rate review process, and there was at least some comments on, how we can improve that process in our review. And I think there was someone who mentioned that our Office of Administrative Litigation could play a larger role. Bob, you're shaking your head in that review. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I've been through too many transmission formula rate proceedings here at FERC. What we see and most transmission owners have now switched from a stated rate approach to a transmission formula rate approach. What we see in the actual litigation of that and the settlement of that is that Office of Administrative Litigation staff is extremely helpful in the initial establishment of the formula rate. But as we know, the rubber hits the road when the costs are flowed through on an annual basis and we get annual informational updates. OAL staff is not involved for whatever reason. I don't know whether it's an authority issue or a resource issue, but they are not involved at that stage of it. But what we do see in the initial establishment is they have the technical wherewithal to assist consumers, consumer advocate offices, state commissions in evaluating the proposed formula rate. And that's delving into the Excel spreadsheet that is the formula. That's help on return on equity issues and capital structure issues. That's help on the protocols that accompany all transmission formula rate processes. So they're extremely helpful in that process. Our suggestion in the commission is you take a look at expanding the authority and the resources as necessary to have OAL engage in the annual update process. So that they can bring that same technical wherewithal to reviewing the actual flow through of the costs.
Mr. Chairman, HR has to update our PDs, it seems, for our OAL staff. Yes, sir. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I did want to address some of the concerns and issues around formula rates that we've been hearing quite a bit about. If you believe the rhetoric around it, FERC has just all but abandoned any regulation of transmission rates in this context. I think it's important to debunk that notion, which maybe it plays well on the Twitter space, but doesn't really reflect the reality of what is going on here. I think you need to take into account the formula rate protocols that are currently in place. They provide for stakeholder sessions where there are opportunities for stakeholders to submit information requests and to get information from the utilities. These are serial at times, and they are extensive, sometimes neighboring in the dozens, if not hundreds, of questions. And it's not just simply one round. There are opportunities to raise both informal and formal challenges related to the inputs going into the formula rate process. And we keep overlooking an important area, which is important particularly to me because I oversaw this area at one point during my tenure at the Commission, and that is the audit process. That's a fairly robust effort by the Commission to keep tabs on how the process is playing out. Any number of utilities that use formula rates are subject to audits. The audits, I know from personal experience, are extensive. And they are effective because they do a very thorough examination of how adherence to the rates, to the protocols, to the formula is all working. So I think we need to keep in mind all of the existing processes before we start thinking about what do we need to do above and beyond that.
Thank you for putting that on the record. My time is up, and I have to say, I was in favor of this time thing. I don't know how that's going to work going forward. I have a quick yes or no question. Can I get like 1 minute? Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and Mr. Is it Hugh Ho? Ha. Thank you. Apologies again. You mentioned in your statement that FERC should define transmission beneficiary as any consumers who receive electrons from a transmission project based on power modeling software. If that's correct for beneficiaries of transmission, would that also extend to transmission upgrades?
Yes, yeah, it's a matter of that the beneficiary will pay for any type of any cost related to the transmission project, whether it's new or existing.
They taught you at the law firm, when you get the answer you want, stop talking. Go ahead.
If I get in trouble, I'll hire you. Just a few questions here. I want to actually, Ms. Barbash and Mr. Shukar, if I could address my first question to you first, both of you first. I'm just interested, we're obviously here to talk about cost and cost containment and so on. I'm curious about the procurement practices that you use for these big regional projects to ensure or reduce cost exposure for consumers.
Sure. Well, of course, we do competitive bidding. All our major equipment goes out for an RFP. And we try to, especially, we're a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway Energy. So we do have a lot of economies of scale in our supply chain. So we try to get as many bidders as possible. What's really important is writing your technical specifications very solidly, because you will end up, you may get the lowest cost bid, but if you don't have your technical specs met, you will spend a lot more than the lowest cost or the highest cost even in your change orders. So that's critical. And before the supply chain issues started creeping up and the delays and the costs with inflation, it didn't make a lot of sense to index, but you have to adjust to the times. So indexing on raw materials is starting to come back into play as well. We do go in and regular status reports with our commission staff in the state, and look at the variances as we do with any project, and adjust as necessary. Earlier on in a project, you have a higher level of contingency in your budget, and that gets narrowed down as things get more certain. You get through your permitting, you get your major equipment orders in, and things like that.
Thank you, Chairman. So stepping back, we kind of look at this from a long run perspective. And what I mean is, when we build these projects, these large projects out there, they have impacts that don't just drive that first project, but projects that come after that, right? So when we step back and think about how do we manage this, we look at it from what is the most effective and efficient way to put the project in place and future projects in place. So managing cost, we go out for bids with both the supply and the material and the labor that does it. Almost everything we do, we contract out. But when we look at that, we step back and say, okay, are the contractors, not just are they lowest cost, what kind of performance have they had in the past? Do they create issues with landowners that will result in problems in the future? What's their quality and their safety records, and making sure we're doing that? Do they have local supply? Do they have diverse supply in there? Because that's things that our states look for. And so we tie all of those together to say, how do we drive that down? And then we work with them to identify, are there better ways than what we identified to maybe drive cost out, and really look to be efficient with that. And then on the supply side, as was mentioned before, we have a procurement. Sometimes you can buy a cheap or lower cost transformer, but that may have more O&M in the future. So we look at that whole life cycle cost when we're trying to balance it off, and also make sure we have a good supply. So you may be able to reduce a little bit of cost on one transformer, but if you have spares, you want to make sure that all fits together also. And so we try to tie that all together to ensure that we're delivering the lowest cost and the greatest value to our customers, not only for that project, but for those projects that come down the road.
Mr. Rav, I'm going to get to you in a second. I think you're going to address the question I'm going to ask in a minute, but I wanted to first get to the two RTOs they heard, Ms. Furnish and Mr. Susky. And what do you all do as the RTO in terms of these regional projects in terms of ensuring that costs are incurred in a prudent manner?
I'll go first. Certainly, our story is actually over a decade old when we had one of our first regionally funded 345 kV projects. The cost came in much higher than the original estimates. And so the regional state committee that has authority over cost allocation under our governance was really concerned and passed a number of motions asking the RTO to take a look at that. Based upon that process and the request of the RSC, we've had a process that has evolved over 10 years in which we actually track the costs, not only before the utility has a notice to construct, through the estimation process to the actual notice to commence construction. Then there is a quarterly tracking report. If a project comes in over 10% of the original cost, it becomes has a review that's more specific. During the entire construction process, every quarter, the SPP board and the regional state committee and member committees get to review those costs. If they reach above a 20% out of bandwidth, then the board of directors can order that the project be suspended and no longer constructed. And that has happened in our footprint. If you take a look at my opening statement, you will see the trend over the past several years that some projects are more expensive than the original estimate, some are less expensive. But in aggregate, the trend has been they've been below the original cost estimate. It's gotten more precise, more effective in that measurement, and I think a lot of it has to do with the 10 years of the evolution of the process. But we do have a process to track it, and if they get too high, it can be restudied and canceled, and it has been canceled before.
First.
So what we really think about is how can we be certain in what the design of the project needs to be from the onset to kind of help with what Ms. Barbash talked about with the cost containment there, to have a firm scope of what is needed so you don't have significant amount of change orders later on. We do quarterly status updates on what's going on with that cost, and then we would use our variance analysis as a stop as well to just monitor those projects and what's going on with the cost on.
Thanks. So that leads me to my next question, which, Mr. Huff, I want to address it to you, Chair Gortowski, as well as Mr. Weishar, but also want to give you a chance to say what you wanted to say earlier. But my question is, what information do you think that are you getting the information that you need in these processes to make sure that these costs are incurred prudently, or if not, what information do you need that you haven't been able to access?
Sure. Thank you for the question. The one issue that we have, and I think it's been stated before, as consumer advocates, we have smaller offices, we have limited resources, and not to bring out that dead horse, but I'm going to drag it out one more time and give it another beating. That a lot of times we don't know what we don't know, and that's a big issue. That where an independent, I also bring up the independent transmission monitor, is someone that can come in and help us walk through and explain. I mean, I know he said it. Some have stated he should be or he or she, I apologize, should be a resource, but is also it's a person that's independent, and we found that more independence in these type of situations is better. I won't get into RTO governance, but there's a lot of times that it feels like our voice isn't heard, and an independent market or an independent transmission monitor, I did the same thing. That would help out with that, would help us to decipher this data that we have, because there's cases where we've received, recent case, we've had 600,000 documents that were provided to us in discovery. So we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it's not necessarily an informational issue. Our view is it's more of a structural issue. So even if we got all the engineering analysis from a transmission owner, I'm not sure what we would do with it all other than go out and hire our own set of engineers to try to disagree with their engineers and question the prudence of the process. And when I say it's a structural issue, and going back to Commissioner Phillips' question, I think here's where an independent transmission planner and some role for an independent transmission monitor is important. If those entities have the technical wherewithal on a regular basis to review that type of information, they have a standing set of engineers and can review it from an objective, independent standpoint. The other comment I'll make, and again, it goes back to competition. What can competition do for you? Competition is not just in the context of individual transmission owners going out and determining which contractor is best to build X number of towers. It's also a competition of ideas. So where a reliability issue is identified, or a congestion issue is identified, or an economic issue is identified, give us all the different solutions that are possible to address that particular issue. That's, I think, one of the real benefits of more and open competition for a greater number of transmission facilities, that competition of ideas.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just to echo a little bit what Bob was just saying, if we get information, the question is what would we do with it? And let me just give a comparison. Suppose that we in the states, maybe it's NESCO, maybe it's one state that's looking at information, and we'd hire someone and we'd start asking questions. Well, at that moment, the lawyers descend with their shields and swords, and it becomes a fight. And so it's not really conducive to a cooperative effort that tries to get to the right answer. If you put in an independent transmission monitor who comes with the authority of the commission, the swords and shields stay outside the door. They might bring in lawyers as unarmed bodyguards, but you get a situation where there's discussion that can take place. And having an independent monitor starts at the beginning and runs through. There are alternatives that are going to be in play that affect costs. There are many things that affect costs. There's benchmarks against costs. But if we have someone with the authority of the commission who's involved in the process, that creates the cost oversight, which I believe does not exist in New England today. The ISO is not a regulator, and Bob Ethier can straighten me out in the next panel if they're doing some more things I'm not aware of. Everything that they do, my understanding is they don't get involved in things that would look like prudency challenges. They do allocate between regional and local network service. But from Rhode Island's perspective, we're small. You just have to look at a map and see that we have a small geography. We don't have that much transmission there. And 75% of our transmission rates that we just pass through comes from the regional network service. So we don't have any visibility to what's happening. We depend entirely on the federal process. And it's troubling as the increases in transmission occur and are going to continue to occur that we don't appear to have the kind of oversight that we would really like to have. And so it's not so much the information, because there are protocols that were put in place that actually are very helpful to anyone who has the expertise to look at it. But the question is who's looking at it.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Gastecker, I was going to ask you my last question, but I'm feeling you're going to address the same subject. Well, I was going to ask about independent transmission monitor. There's a lot of discussion on all the panels today. One of the benefits is obviously access to analysis and understanding maybe that because of lack of resources other entities don't have, other stakeholders don't have. I know I read your position on the legality of it. We could talk about that, but I'm curious about when you were talking about the formula rate cases. You're exactly right. The audit process is very good, but it's a limited opportunity. We have limited staff too to do audits, and so I think just relying on the audit process and even the other processes that are underway I've been involved in formula rate cases before. It's not easy when you don't have the access to the information. What's wrong with assuming it's legal? What's wrong with having an independent monitor to help analyze the information, make sure that consumers are adequately protected?
I think at the root of it, first of all, is how do you define what the roles and responsibilities would be of an independent transmission monitor? And before I get into that, you mentioned, and by the way, this is what I was going to talk about anyway, so we're thinking alike. I do want to flag the legal issues associated with an independent transmission monitor because I do not believe they are trivial. It is absolutely clear that the commission cannot subdelegate its authority to a third party to do those things that the commission is responsible for. This is long-standing case law by the DC Circuit going back nearly 2 decades at least. And that then goes to what would an independent transmission monitor do? what would the scope of the authority be? And I have to tell you that based on the reason I put my card up was because I immediately heard something that triggered with me, which was a reference to someone with authority of the commission in reference to the independent transmission monitor. That can't be an independent transmission monitor. It cannot be an entity that's acting with authority of the commission. But even if you clarify that, I've heard this, and if you read the comments that came in, and I went through them all last night, there are continual troubling references to what the expectations are of what this entity would do. Oversight, reasonableness review, oversight functions, empowered to act in the public interest, help the commission by extension. All of these are what FERC should be doing, not a third party doing it on behalf of the commission. Now, is it possible to confine and restrict that role such that it is not stepping over a legal line? I'd say theoretically possible. However, I think history has shown us in analogous contexts with the market monitors, there is a tendency, even if you try to define those roles and confine them, of mission creep. And I think the potential for that, no matter how you try to set up an independent transmission monitor to avoid these types of legal restrictions on it, is only likely to result in a similar problem. So above and beyond that, when you get to the questions about access to information, I think there should be access to information that is needed for participants to try to participate in whatever proceedings there are to take reviews or challenge decisions or actions that are being undertaken. I think I did flag the audit function, but I don't want to make it sound like that's the only thing that happens in a formula rate process. There are responsibilities on stakeholders to pursue information. But I have to say, at this very conference, over and over again, I'm hearing, and I think I heard it twice alone on this panel, people are saying, we don't know what we would do with the information even if we got it. I think the commission needs to think long and hard about adding additional processes that aren't actually accomplishing what the goals are, and that actually may be delaying or protracting and making more contentious already difficult processes that are in existence. So I'm sorry I used so much time, but I will stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions on this.
Thanks. I know my time has run out, but maybe we can get quickly Mr. Weishar and Chair Gorotowski.
Yeah, just on the independent transmission monitor issue, I don't question Mr. Gastiger's characterization of law. There is a subdelegation issue, but it's the same subdelegation issue that the commission established and grappled with in the establishment of market monitors over energy markets and capacity markets and ancillary services markets. So I think you can find your way legally to get there with ITMs. The debate is over the scope of functionality. and I think you look at that on a spectrum from ITM just monitoring process compliance and then making referrals to enforcement, all the way to ITM being fully staffed with a team of engineers questioning the engineering judgment. And where you ultimately land on that spectrum, I think, is a policy call for the commission. But I think there is merit in having at least that minimal function of ensuring compliance with the processes. And I mentioned earlier structural reforms. Structural reforms will come with processes. As long as you're complying with those processes, and even in a competitive context, having an independent entity ensure there's no anti-competitive behavior occurring in those competition processes is an important role. And there's some ambiguity about whether the existing market monitors have that authority. So the commission should address that.
Mr. Chairman.
Just really quickly, when I said authority, I wasn't intending to suggest that there was going to be orders that were going to be issued in directing anything. I think Commissioner Christie already drew out some of the ideas that from the prior panels. Reports can be provided to the commission. The commission can then decide if it's done publicly. Parties can then respond, but you always retain your authority to make the final decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Christie.
I want to go to Mr. Gastiger first, and you talked about the You wanted to rebut the Twitter rhetoric on formula rates. And let me just say, and I'm asking the chairman right now, I want to see you and Ari Pesco in here, mano a mano, on formula rates, and let's just throw Rofer in. And I would buy a ticket as long as the cost was J&R, but I would. So here's my question. That was a wish. So the chairman asked a great question this morning in the first panel. The chairman said, is the CPCN process at the state level too late? Too late. And I've got an answer to that, but I'm going to ask you. If the states have a robust CPCN process or IRP, and I know in some states, like you're mentioning with Ms. Barbash, and I think in Georgia, in some states the IRP is the ballgame. I mean, what's in there gets built, so okay, that's sort of a quasi CPCN. In a lot of states, the IRP is not that at all. It's just a planning snapshot. And again, where I've said before, the rubber hits the road in the CPCN. So, Mr. Gastiger, if the state has a robust CPCN process and they're looking at all the things they can look at and should be looking at, and then finally decided, this project is needed. But let's say that a state doesn't, and we've had a lot of testimony that there are states that don't really look hard, and not because it's their fault. I mean, many of them have been stripped of authority by their legislatures. If the state doesn't have a robust CPCN process, then is the formula rate treatment too late to protect consumers? Because when it comes here, whatever happens in formula rates, and you've detailed, the audits and everything, cake has been baked. The project has been approved, it's under construction, and really, no matter how much is audited, it's going to get formula rate treatment and it's going to get most of the money. So is that too late? I don't agree. I don't think the CPCN process, I'll answer my chairman's question, I don't think it's too late if it's robust and comprehensive. If it's not robust and comprehensive, then it's not a question of being too late. It ain't never there at all. So if it's not, is formula rates treatment too late?
Well, I would say no, partially because I think what we've got in place is an unequal but defense in-depth process at different stages throughout all of the processes that these projects go through. You've identified a critical one in some states with respect to certificates of public convenience and necessity and the reviews that go on there. In MISO, and SPP and other regions, they have their own processes that they go through in evaluating projects. They're not making necessarily the needs determination you're talking about, but they are doing different evaluations of these projects with frequently multiple and extensive opportunities for input, for opportunities to get information relating to the projects. And then once it would get to the commission, as I mentioned, there are some additional processes, even if you're in the formula rate context, where you can continue to do challenges. And then ultimately, you do have the opportunity through 206 proceedings to file complaints about matters that are deemed unjust and unreasonable. So I think there are any number of tools in the process chain.
Well, that's really too late, but yeah. 206. But let me ask you, so we all know that in the RTOs, no matter how robust their process is, and I asked this question to Mr. Paulus, consumer advocate of PJM, the planning process is not an adversarial process. It's not a process of litigation where witnesses have to get on a stand, be sworn in, be cross-examined, where you can really dig into the assumptions and that underlie and the data that underlie the request to build a $500 million project. You're not going to do that on RTO. It's not an adversarial process. It's a planning process, and you can add 1 million stakeholders, and you can fiddle with the stakeholder process and make it more Byzantine than it already is. It's not going to get you there. Only a robust state CPCN is where you can litigate it and dig behind the assumptions and dig behind the claims that are made. And if that hasn't happened, if that has just been rubber stamped at the state level, again, not because the state commissions were lazy, but because they've been stripped of authority. How does the formula rate process, why isn't it too late?
Well, I guess let me go back to your question about the difference between states that have CPCN processes and those that don't. I mean,
Right.
I do think one factor to take into account is whether you agree with it or not. Those state legislatures have made that determination that for whatever reason, those processes shouldn't be in place.
Yeah, we wonder how that happens.
So at a minimum, the states have the opportunity and they have made that determination.
I agree with you, they do.
So
And
your
if formula
question
rate
then is-
treatment wasn't available for a state that had been stripped of authority, maybe the incentive wouldn't be as great.
And your question is, in the absence of that, are there adequate other opportunities and avenues for those types of examinations to occur? And my view is if you look at the processes that are in place at all stages throughout, there are ample opportunities to raise challenges. I think that's borne out by the fact that even in instances where people are saying we need more information, we need access to have more information about projects, at the end of the day, they're saying, but you know what, if we get it, we're not even sure what we can do with it. And I'm not saying that's not a problem, but there are the opportunities there for them to get access to that information and take steps.
Part of the issue is what are you going to do with the information? That really breaks the question of what kind of proceeding are you talking about? I mean, if you're just getting it because they mailed it to you, no, you're probably not going to spend all night reading it. But if it's just part of a litigated CPCN proceeding where it's evidence and it's going to be offered by a witness who has to authenticate it and stand up on the stand and be cross-examined, that's a whole different process, I can tell you. And that's where you get to the bottom of this stuff. That's where you really get to the bottom of this stuff. And if that has never happened, they come here for formula rates, it seems to me like it's too late.
Thank you. I appreciate this line of questioning from Commissioner Christie and I think Chairman, you started with it, identifying that the availability of opportunity for oversight on some subset of projects varies from state to state. That's a really important point. And also, before that time, there's an entire FERC jurisdictional planning process and cost allocation process that has to be satisfied, independent of whatever this challenge and opportunity that happens at the CPCN stage. People have talked about these various stages. Those are all FERC jurisdictional rules that we have panelists today suggesting concerns over how things are going. And that's, to my mind, where perhaps this idea of an independent transmission monitor comes in. Now, the set of responsibilities that this commission might decide to assign to a monitor, of course, is not yet fully baked. That's what today is for. And I think we've had really good suggestions about some of the roles that those monitors could play. I think the idea that any monitor would look at every single line and propose alternatives wasn't really the spirit of the concept as it came out from this commission originally in the NOPR. So on that piece, I want to ask Mr. Weishar and Chairman Garwatowski, both of you spoke to this concept, I think, of the independent transmission monitor in your comments, and in light of kind of where the dialogue of this panel has gone, do you have any additional perspective relative to what that set of roles and responsibilities we should be narrowing in around is?
Yeah, thank you. I had mentioned earlier the spectrum of responsibilities. I think an ITM provides value even if you're at the lighter end of that spectrum. So if you get the structural reforms correct, and then the tariffs and the business practice manuals, et cetera, that accompany those structural reforms are correct, having an independent entity ensure that whether it's an independent transmission planner or a transmission owner complies with those processes, I think that at a minimum would provide value to consumers. Whether the commission wants to go beyond that and equip the ITM with a higher level skill set, a set of engineers, all those kind of things in order to really get involved in the merits of the process is another issue. But at a minimum, ensuring compliance with the process and the commission rules would provide at least some value.
Mm-hmm.
I think how the mission is defined will define what the duties are, and we've had different perspectives on this. I look at it through the lens of cost containment and managing costs. If you do that, as I said earlier, you're there from the monitor's there from the beginning through consideration of alternatives which could affect costs, as well as benchmarks determine whether the proposals that are in place make sense. And having the authority to be able to ask the questions and get the information to make an assessment of whether the costs associated with this and the alternatives have been considered enough is, from my perspective, giving and looking at it through the perspective of consumers and making sure that the costs are being contained. That's how I would define the role. Now, there's some planning parts of this that I don't have the expertise on that may blend into it, but that's the lens through which I've been looking at it.
Thanks. Mr. Howe?
Thank you. And I guess I envision the independent transmission monitor more of similar to the IMM in PJM. And it's where it would really help the consumers of, I'm specifically looking at Ohio. Sorry that I'm very focused on that, but that is my job. We've discussed it before, the supplemental project issue within PJM, where these projects that are local projects, that PJM's only review of them are a do no harm. And it would give that extra level of review of those projects. And that where it's in this, we always call it a regulatory catch-22, where everyone's kind of pointing the finger, no, you should look at it, you should look at it. And we feel an independent monitor such as this would be able to look at these independently and see if there are competitive solutions that are better than that. See if there are other ways to basically go about fixing these instead of just giving it to the transmission owner and saying, sure, go ahead, throw it in your formula rate base, and we'll throw it in the blender, and if someone has a problem with it, we'll take a look at it later.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be really quick. I would say just the caution, it was one of the questions for this panel was, can it be cookie cutter RTO versus non-RTO regions? And I would go even further that there's not one solution for everything. As Commissioner Christie described, an IRP process where the project is fully reviewed, is it the best alternative, is it the lowest cost that meets all the objectives, and then just don't lose all common sense after that prudency has been developed. Have regular check-ins. The variance process that Ms. Furnish described, that MISO has, where you come in and you review these projects, and if they no longer make sense, then it's time to do something about them. Whether you delay the service, wrap the in-service date up, do something different, possibly, before you are in there for rate recovery.
Yeah, let me ask in the West, what I think the context I think about is, are these regional IRP plans being considered, or these local IRP plans being considered in the regional planning process? So is the planning, and are you Northern Grid?
No. Yeah, we are in Northern Grid, yes.
Did that planning process contemplate any potential regional departures from any of the projects you've approved in Nevada? And did that consideration happen? And those are the kind of questions, to my mind, in a non-RTO state that an ITM might engage on.
Right, and we do triennial IRPs. So we're going back and looking at the status under statutory obligations every 3 years. But I can tell you we have amendments to our IRP. So we're in there for review of the current status of all the projects multiple times a year.
At the regional level?
Not at the regional level. Unfortunately, the Order 1000 process, due to the multi-jurisdictional issues in the West, hasn't really taken a hold of a cost allocation going through a process yet from a planning authority standpoint. So we don't have experience at that. Again, our states are large, so within a state we're pretty much regional. One of our counties fits in the Rhode Island, I think. So, so I would say, so it is, again, one size fits all is not going to work. We would hate to put in another level of review jurisdiction when it's not meaningful for our ratepayers to pay for it, right?
Yeah,
so we would want it to be meaningful
sure.
and useful and show value.
Sure. Thanks.
just have a brief comment because what I heard was the existing FERC requirements for work that we must do. So I hear words such as compliance being thrown around, and I would say that we are compliant in the work that we're required to do. So one thing that I think we need to consider in this conversation is the value. So what are the objectives, what are the needs, and how can those be met? Because it sounds like it's more than compliance at the end of the day. We're trying to figure out what the value of this additional potential even duplication of work is.
Sure. That should be the underlying ethos for everything we're doing. I'm intrigued by this variance approach that you spoke to. I was going to ask you about it, but since we've heard about it, I actually wanted to go back to Mr. Chairman Garotowski and Mr. Weishart, because I'll admit I asked you the wrong question and I wanted to ask you at the beginning, so I'm going to ask you another question. You both spoke to prudence and formula rates in your comments and the automatic treatment of formula rates, which then impacted customers in Rhode Island, and then this idea about what level of scrutiny is happening. And we do have a structure, $150 billion of investment from 2014 to 2020 in transmission. This commission has disallowed very little of that amount, if any, as imprudent, vis-a-vis states who do, to my anecdotal understanding, disallow expenses as imprudent. And so is there something we should do to increase the level of scrutiny on all or some subset of projects related to this prudency standard and formula rate approach that we've been talking about today?
In fact, I had my card up before you asked that, and I was going to actually address this very issue.
Perfect.
I worked for multi-state utility for 28 years before I retired, and then came out of retirement to work on the other side. And I'm certain that utilities in New England, I'm talking about New England, the New York area, they will all tell you with sincerity that they have procurement programs, they do variances, they look at alternatives, and they care about costs. And they'll mean it sincerely. But I can say that if you look past in the history and you never see a disallowance and you never see anything that's been challenged, and there maybe have been some in New England I'm not aware of, and that is the history for the past 10 to 15 years, then a utility is going to lose sight of that, and it's not going to be a priority, and they're not going to be thinking about it, and the engineers aren't going to be thinking about it, the financial folks aren't going to be thinking about it, because there's no risk. And I think one of the parts about having an independent monitor here is that it suddenly brings it to, there is a risk here. We've got to be paying closer attention to it. That creates the attention, and as well as the substance of the review. And so I don't know if that's actually answering what you were driving at, but that's one of the most important points that I would make is I really believe that there's a sense that, and I don't mean to be flip about this, but the way you recover transmission rates is spend the money, get the money, spend the money, get the money. And that's the view. And if you have that view, there's no risk. And I know that no one intends it that way. And you have a great staff that goes through and does the audits, not taking that away either. And we're in the small state of Rhode Island. I mean, a fraction of what you have. And I just think that more needs to be done. And I'm not trying to disparage anyone, the utilities or any staff, but I really do feel strongly that something else is needed. And the monitor idea certainly rang with me very strongly.
Thank you.
I agree with everything he just said. In addition, we had made some suggestions in our comments about looking at the rebuttable presumptions around prudence. So when a transmission project comes in right now, that burden is on the consumer to show that a project for which the expenditure has already occurred is imprudent, and that's you look at the statistics, it's almost a zero possibility of establishing prudence of transmission investment. What we had suggested is that in certain situations, that burden should shift to the transmission owner. They should make their case as part of either a stated rate case or as part of an annual informational update. And they need to show that they've optimized the existing system, and that brings in the notion of grid enhancing technologies. Have they optimized the existing system? And then second was their independent oversight of the project. So you look at sort of the balance in MISO and PJM, where 25% of the total spend is subject to some type of independent review and investigation, and 75% is not. That raises some questions. So in situations where there's not been independent oversight and review and approval by an independent board of that particular project, Our view is that burden should shift to the transmission owner to demonstrate prudence rather than having that burden lie with consumers to demonstrate imprudence.
Thank you.
Do you have a? Oh, did somebody?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. I take a little bit of exception to that we have no incentive to do what's the right thing. From a consumer perspective, our business is successful when our territories are having good growth, and that only happens when we drive high levels of reliability and low cost for our customers. And so we're always focused on that. We have to go through the processes, whether it's at the state level where we get recovery of cost, CPCNs, as Commissioner Christie has talked about. But we also go through the review, and in each of our cases, whether it's through the sub-regional planning, we have different entities come in and ask a ton of questions from us, and we try to respond to those. But then also at the formula rates, they come in and they do challenge us. They do request information related to where's our transmission spend, and are we doing these projects cost effectively? And so we have plenty of places where we not only have oversight from those who are impacted, but we have a huge incentive to deliver low cost, high reliable power to our customers so our regions can be as successful as they are.
That prompts me to say that should never be the issue of intent, right? All of us are here today to keep the lights on at affordable rates for customers, and I think the idea is we have structures that are evolving, and the opportunity and need to reconsider some of those, and we've had the opportunity today to shine a light on some of these issues, which are really important ones. So I certainly appreciate the comment and the participation today.
Thank you. And actually, I just want to build off of your comment, Commissioner, which is I do think it's at least helpful in the broader context of this overall technical conference to be mindful of if the Commission believes that there is further action that needs to be taken with respect to these processes or procedures. In order to invoke its Section 206 authority, there's going to actually need to be a determination that those existing processes and procedures are unjust and unreasonable. I've heard a lot of discussion today about things that would be better, that might be more helpful, maybe not, things along that line, all of which I think is important for the Commission to hear about. But in order to form a record and a foundation and basis for Section 206 action, the threshold is going to need to be higher than just trying to make things better than they are right now. And I am a little concerned because so much focus on this technical conference has actually been on things like an independent transmission monitor, which is in the solutions context, and to some extent either leaps over or assumes that there is a problem to be dealt with. And I think it's just important for the Commission to be mindful that if you are contemplating further action down the road, it's very important that the Commission make sure it satisfies that very important legal prerequisite.
All right, I think that will wrap up panel 4. So we'll take a 15-minute break and be back with panel 5. Thank you.